that to get used for events like this. So it's really great to see the full room. Thanks again for coming. A few things to cover before we get going. The toilets are through the back there, the first row on the right, and fire exits also through the back. You can see we've got some Ice Scott magazines lying around. The current issue for July is half price at the moment, so if you want a different one of these, it's £50. You see someone up at the desk here. And we've got the back issues are £1, so a donation just for the actual cutting those up. We'll have refreshments will be available later on, free of charge, but we would appreciate a small donation. You see the donation bar at the top there. We're run entirely by volunteers and we rely on people's generosity to keep it going. We've got some direct debits for people that we set up and almost covers our outgoings, but not quite there yet. So if anyone would like to join the club with that, I would much appreciate it. But like I say, we're open 5 weeks now and we're not too bad, but again, we need support to keep it going and we want to try and make a success of it. So all support, no matter how little, is welcome. The mission statement that we've got here, you've maybe seen it at the door. It's basically we're just trying to be a grassroots, provide a space for grassroots politics locally. But also, if anyone's got any ideas we'd like to use forward for, no matter what it is, we'll consider it as long as it fits in with the mission statement. Then you can use it for that. So if anyone has got an input or ideas, then don't hesitate to let us know. So I'd like to thank Lesley for coming along tonight. Lesley's one of Scotland's best known commentators and broadcasters. He's helped positions such as assistant editor of the Scotsman and contributing editor of the Sunday Herald. She's a weekly columnist for the Scotsman and the National, and she's worked on programmes on Radio 4, Radio 2, Radio Scotland, and for which she's received 2 Sony Speech Broadcaster Awards. In 2006, Lesley was shortlisted for the Orwell Prize for political writing. She's the founder of Nordic Horizons and organiser there, and she also runs her own radio and podcast company. If you tune into Lesley's podcast, you'll hear that she's in a swift time, she's here and there doing events like these. So it's well worth a listen if you've not tuned into that yet. She's also the founding member of the Ireland Heritage Trust, which led to a successful community buyout in 1997. And last but not least, so the author of Blossom, which we're going to have a chat about tonight, hopefully. Well worth the read if you haven't read it, and there are copies available up there. So without further ado, Lesley, thank you.
Well, wow. It's great actually, after all the long period of the referendum and then the election. It's unusual to find things that have just started, they're just 5 weeks old, because it feels like everything's at least 2 years old now if it started at all. Can I just ask you something? Why did you decide now, Roseanne? Why did you decide to start this now? This at this point?
During the referendum, we had looked for premises and there was just nothing available, not within our price range anyway. And we had a gazebo along every Saturday at the community centre.
By the way.
Yes.
4 people would hold it down.
Yes, that's when men came in handy. And as it got nearer and nearer the date of the referendum, we were doing it more and more, and we thought, we had all this energy and people wanting to talk, and then suddenly nothing. So when we got the chance of this, it just...
And who did you get this off of?
It's the council's.
Right.
We let it. We get from the council.
Right. And that's really interesting. Well, good on you, because I mean, this is actually very relevant for the book in a way, because I started writing that book before the referendum was called, actually. I mean, probably I've been sort of writing it for 5 years, off and on. In fact, I've been collecting the stories all my journalistic life. And I found I was tending to repeat them so often, and that they seemed to stand for something so many times that I thought it was probably better to try and put them down in print. And it was only when I was beginning to do that that I began to feel that there was a sort of connection. And the connection between them so often was just chronic disempowerment. And when I started to look at some things, I'm no expert in Scottish history. I started off on the other side of the water, as you might hear from my accent, and I'm no expert in Irish history either, because it was all so dicky over there that all you learnt about was Brian Boru, who was kind of conveniently dead 2,000 years ago or something. And then we just skipped to English history like everybody else. So it was a curiosity on my part to try and see why we've sort of got to where we've got to. And some of the things you discover en route are both uplifting and crushingly disappointing. But it's our history, all of it. Not just William Wallace, not just the convenient bits, but all the kind of icky bits in the middle as well. Just as this journey we're on is a journey. The long boring bits, which might be the bit we're in the middle, as well as the exciting dramatic bits that we've been through, it's all the same journey. But to start the thing off, I kind of was thinking, what would it be sort of for Scotland to be a success? Because if you don't know what sort of cuts muster, you didn't know if we're short of it or if we're doing quite well. And it's always astonished me. I mean, when we used to come across on holiday, we came from Belfast to do this kind of pilgrimage to go and see our grandparents. Maybe some of you had these kind of summer holidays as well. There was no option. You just had to go to visit your grandparents, that was it. And ours were in Wick, right in the north of Scotland, and in Road Junction in Banffshire. I'm not totally sure we scored there on the lucky side. The Road Junction in Banffshire was kind of Ordequill, was a bit sort of, nothing much happening there. But the journey was unbelievable. We used to come across in one day, we'd come across from Belfast, come over on the ferry, get lost in Ayrshire, get to Glasgow, get really lost there, maybe hit the A9 before it had any duelling in it, so you sort of crawled along, behind the caravan, all the way up. Maybe you get the right road to get over to Banffshire. If we're going up to Wick, we get to Inverness, one stop to get strawberries out of the market there. That was the first stop since we came off the ferry. So we were a bit, knackered by that point. Back in the car, go further up north before any of the bridges had been built over the firths. So you used to zigzag in all of them. You could see where you were going to go, but you had to go all the way up along to get to it. And we'd take a shortcut over the Strui. Don't know if any of you are with me still. And my dad would stop and he'd get out of the car, second stop from Belfast, and he'd say, "This is the finest view in Scotland," which of course is highly debatable. Back in the car, go and finally get to Wick. God, glory be, So to us, that was one average journey. That was about our only journey in Scotland. If we ever came to Scotland, we'd travel the length of it. And so when we came across the water here in 1973, I was just staggered at how little Scots travelled around. And actually, in the course of all of that movement, a couple of things were blindingly obvious. One, it's a stunning country. If you do go the length of it and the width of it, it's unbelievably diverse. You actually need to go to other countries to realise how unusual that diversity is, actually. So it's a stunning landscape. It's got energy resources kind of driven out of its lugs. I mean, when you look at the places I was involved in Wick, not just the kind of nuclear, but before really Doonray took hold, my family were able to point at the Pentland Firth and say, do you know the top 6 tidal stream sites in Europe are in that firth? I mean, everyone knew what the potential of the tides were. Nobody had done much about it. And then, through to the other side of Banffshire, they were in trawlers or they were eventually moved off into the oil. The potential, the huge resources we had was evident to me from when I was 9. And so you get this mounting sense, perhaps you had the same thing, this mounting kind of puzzlement about how a country that's kind of, if you like, stacked with food and all that, can seem to be going along with all the problems we've got. You know, I mean, is that, you know, that kind of country ought to be producing people who are healthy, wealthy, and wise. And are we? You know, unhealthy? Nah. You know, we still are the sick man and now women of Europe. I mean, the Greeks may be in their cups at the moment in financial terms, but they're doing a lot better than us in many physical ways. I've just come back from there, and you know, they live a healthier lifestyle. Of course, they're not as urbanised as we are, but there's lots of urbanised communities that are not quite as sick as we are, to be blunt. And you know, there are wards, most of them in Glasgow, where men and women are not reaching 48 as an average life expectancy. Now that's actually lower than the Gaza Strip, and that's us. So there's something kind of wrong there. Wealthy, well, we've got extremes. You know, that same sort of neighbourhood has got some of the lowest incomes in Europe. And at the same time, we actually have in Aberdeenshire, the place that has the highest number of multimillionaires in Britain. That's a higher proportion in Aberdeenshire than London. London has more millionaires, Aberdeenshire has more multimillionaires. Welcome to Scotland. So we've got that incredible reach in terms of wealth. Wise? Are we wise? I mean, we seem to be awfully prone to extremes, shall we say, politely. We drink too much, we eat too much. In fact, if there's anything to do, we do it too much. We don't seem to have got a kind of stop button. We're not very good at balance. We just go until it's gone, and if it's not gone, we just keep going. I mean, some of that, I think, harks back to the very recent past and experience of not having had enough, of having a constant uncertainty that you'd be entitled to anything the next day, the next minute. So if there's something in front of you, you bloom and swipe it. You take it while you can. I've got a brother-in-law from Canada, and he came over and said, "You're such a grabby culture, you Scots. You grab everything the second you can." And I kind of thought about that. He was talking particularly about driving up the A9 in Canada. I haven't been, but you know, it's big, you're slapping great roads, and you can tell to exactly the minute when you arrive because you just set the speed limit and you just go from one, you know, town to the next. Whereas, as you know, if you go up the road, you could take 4 hours, it could take 2, depending on who you get stuck behind or whatever. Of course, it's a bit more constant now, given the 60-mile-an-hour speed limit right enough. But he was saying, you know, the way you guys drive, if you see a wee opportunity to pass somebody, you have to take it. You have to just go, you know. You just have to sit there, you know, it's true. But working all the way through our behaviour, I see that kind of tendency in myself. I was studying, I'm doing a PhD in Norway at the moment, and I learned Norwegian to do it. Slight attention to detail problem, because when I got there, got into the archives, it's a history PhD, got some of the documents out, got the gloves on that you have to wear, looked at it was all in Danish. So anyway, luckily you can kind of just about see where some of them are coming from. But when I was over there, I was needing to get onto the internet system of the university, and I kind of anticipated that for some reason the computer would say no. So I came loaded with letters and reasons why I should be treated specially, because you do. You expect nothing. You expect exclusion. You expect hiccups. You expect a problem. So, especially if it's another country, why should we worry about someone like me? And all of that's telling you something about our lives here. When I went there, I was standing in the queue, and a lot depended on me getting this access, actually. So by the time I got to the front, I was quite wound up. I was trying to be kind of cool. And the guy was just sitting slowly working away at the computer. And finally, I just couldn't resist it anymore. And I said, look, I really do need to get this down, professor, that, you know. And he sort of looked up at me and he said, you don't need to try this hard. You are entitled. And, I mean, that was one of these moments, because I thought, really? You know, the expectation that you will be excluded is so powerful. And I am not somebody who struggles in life, but I have it. I absolutely have it. I expect there to be that sort of yes for you, but no for, no for you. So here we are. Wise? I don't know if it's even a question of wisdom, because some of these approaches to life arise from very powerful human dynamics that nobody really gives much time to. In the course of looking at the book, I looked at some things, maybe they ring bells with you, maybe they didn't. There's a chap called Pierre Bourdieu, who's a French sociologist, and he talked about a kind of idea of habitus. That is the sort of habits you have, the preferences you have, the tastes you have, the things you like doing, the things that are kind of within the realm of what you would consider your kind of thing. And his idea was that actually everybody sits within a kind of crude sort of sphere like that. So that, for example, if you're a Scot, you just aren't. If you're a working class Scot, you're not going to have a name like Priscilla. You're just not. If you're Marvin from The Scheme, if you watch that on the telly, you're not going to eat salads. Ain't going to happen. You're not going to go sailing. Nobody in this room probably is going to put on +4s and go hunting, I suspect. It's just not a thing that you kind of do, because if you did, you would be seen as one of them. And this idea is very strong. I mean, when I think about it, it's quite a serious matter. Because if you think that, for example, choice, I used to work in the BBC, and we used to go for coffees for a break, and you'd come with a long list of people's coffee requirements. Half coffee, half hot milk, half decaffeinated coffee, half soya milk, half, you come with all these kind of exotic lists of stuff. And I can remember the cashiers used to just say, "Who have you got? There are a lot of English folk." And I said, what was that about? That was about the notion that Scots aren't fussy. I mean, another great phrase my mother used to chuck at me was, "Take it with your lips shacking," which was mostly, if something fall on the floor, just eat it. There's nothing wrong with it. This idea that you sort of, I think I want soya milk because I've read it, is kind of, what is that saying? It's suggesting really that the habitus of Scots is that we just kind of get on with it. We just don't make a fuss like that. We don't try to weed ourselves out and pretend that we're so special, that our bodies need soy milk and you can just do with whatever else it is. We stick with what everybody does. So, Henry Healy kind of sausages, the sort of sliced sausages, which I must say, I've astonished my friends from Uganda who just thought that was something they would never see again in their lives. It's fine. If it's good enough for your mum, it's good enough for you. You're not going to quibble. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? And that's what choice is. It's you looking like you think you're a bit better than the rest. And actually, we need to make different choices sometimes, because our parents, I mean, actually, if I had a diet that my mother had, during the war, in fact, if we all had those diets, we'd probably be all right now. But, we do need to kind of break out of some of these things to make different choices about what we eat, what we aspire to, what we do with our time. We need to think differently, but it feels dodgy. So, for example, actually, can you open the door a wee bit? I'm beginning to get a wee bit real in here. Thanks. Does anybody in the room ski perchance?
Yeah.
Perhaps not yourself, man, but perhaps that's how you go. We've got two folk that ski. Is that right? I said this is an interesting one because when I was younger, I didn't learn to ski because it didn't feel very Scottish. Because the way it sort of felt, now all of this is unwritten rules. This is either mince or you know what I'm on about. But it seemed like the unwritten rule was that Scots basically did things that didn't involve kit. A jumper, that's okay. But if you start getting fancier than that, even football boots, But if you needed kind of complicated things like skis or whatever, nah. That was for those and such as those, the posh folk and all the rest of them. And even though I didn't come from a poor family, I got it. If you were going to look like you were Scottish, I'm coming from Northern Ireland, by God, we needed to make a bit of an effort. You just didn't pick up stuff that looked like it was kind of wrong behaviour. So I didn't learn to ski anyway. And finally, I got married. I've got 2 stepdaughters. and they both wanted to learn to ski. So I thought, okay, get over it, go to France, start to ski. So we're at the top of the hill, and I had characteristically not been listening when they explained how to stop. So I just kind of piled off down the hill, as they all did. And it was only as I was kind of going down, I realised I didn't know how to do the slope, how to stop. So I was kind of gathering speed. And there was at the bottom of the hill, there was a wee lassie. And wow. And she wasn't really looking at me, but by gum, I was focused on her. And I was trying to kind of do some moves to avoid her, but I had no moves because I couldn't ski. So I was still heading straight for her. And before I hit her, I kind of cowered to one side, dumped in my heap, got no sympathy from anybody. And then Rosie said to me, "You're not listening to the instructor." He said, "All you have to do to change direction is just turn your head. If you turn your head, your skis will follow. So what you actually need to do is you need to look where you want to go, and the skis will follow." And she said, "Where are you looking?" Now, to me, this was a big life moment. Not just because I looked at this 12-year-old and thought, you're in the body of a 12-year-old, but you have the wisdom of Methuselah, Because that's a very acute observation. I mean, in life, the thing that you spend a lot of time looking at will be the thing that you actually end up heading towards. It's ironic. The thing that you want to never get anywhere near, if you pour your energy and attention into it, you keep studying it, it basically sucks all your energy into it. Hey, that's where you're going. I don't know if you can see my little parallel coming up here vis-a-vis Westminster. And actually, if you didn't want to go there, if that's not where you want to go, you have to do something that feels a bit counterintuitive. You actually have to look almost in space. You have to look where you want to go. And I wonder if we are looking where we want to go. I think you guys have done a great thing by starting this up, because you clearly are looking where you want to go. Even if you haven't got a destination, you want a space. That's a start. But at the moment, it just strikes me that success for Scots has always been doing a couple of percentage points better at stuff than the English. Let's be blunt. So, local government turnout. At the last elections, we had 38% turnout here. Whoa, that's rubbish. But the English had 30%. 30% is out the window. Yes, we are. Right? Yes, we all are. Because turnouts around the rest of Europe are 60 to 70%. Sweden has 85% turnouts for local elections without compulsion. If you want to feel that we're doing, if that's good enough just to be a few percentage points better than the English at stuff, we can go home. Because we'll probably get there, on balance, on average, we'll probably get there randomly half the time. And that will please everybody, and we'll feel fine, clap ourselves in the back, right. But going back to this question of what the capacity of this country is, come on! The capacity of Scotland is that of a Nordic country. That is in terms of the resources, the outlook, the education, and the supreme resource, which is us. Now, this is the bit where at a lot of talks, people will nod and they go, yeah, you've definitely got resources. We've got the oil, we've got gas, we've got the kind of renewables, we've got a bit of solar around Dundee, but let's not get too excited about that. We've got a lot going for us, and then you get to people who go, it's a bit embarrassing. Yeah, well, not a bit. We're not really on there. And this is actually the biggest problem of a lot of it, is the way that Scots don't basically rate Scots as a resource a lot of the time. And obviously some people do, and very many of them are probably in this room. But a lot of folk, my mother from Wick used to have a wee saying, one of her more miserable sayings, and she had quite a lot of them actually, where she would basically say, the best left. And what that meant really was that when it came to the time of the clearances, the folk that had their heads screwed on saw the lie of the land and just skedaddled. They didn't sit around waiting for, complicated evictions and promises to be broken and betrayal by the church and all the kind of hurts that happened decade after decade after decade. They didn't wait to become cannon fodder then in the army and the navy of the very conquering power that only allowed the tartan to be worn and Gaelic to be spoken if you joined their army after prescribing it after Culloden. They didn't go through all of that. They just got out because they could just tell it was going to be like that. And that's what that little deadly phrase, the best left, means. And many Highlanders will say that, the best left. And if you think that's true, who are we? We're the wrong. Now, I think this is one of the most pernicious things that, things that Mum has actually, because in many ways it is completely the opposite. If you lived in a kind of well-ordered society, like any of the Nordic countries do, if you wanted to change something, you just need to vote. That's why people vote, because it works that way. They have truly local government. I mean, our local government is one of the first weirds about Scotland. And actually, I should say this, my main contention here is that Scotland is weird. And you may be ready for this, or you might be resistant, whatever. But if you're to continually think that Scotland is, if you like, the centre of the universe and everybody else around it is just a bit weird, no matter how often they all have the same way of operating, it's only us that are different, you might need to change your life view a bit here. Because if we're to try and think about where we're going to go, if that's something that we need to have, whether there's a referendum, whether there isn't, in our lives, if we need to have a sense of what direction we're going in, I think we need to realise how much Scotland as it stands is off-beam. I mean, we're, by outlook and all the rest of it, a man's a man for all that, Raw Jock Thompson's parents, all that kind of literary back underpinning, and the fact that we've been voting Labour, God love us, for the best part of 100 years, that's very different from the rest of the UK. If I get just a wee snapshot, not of this election, but the previous one, the percentage of MPs elected in Scotland who are Tory was 1.6%. Now, I know you can't have a 0.6% of an Tory MP, no matter how much you'd like to slice it that way. But statistically, you know what I mean, 1.6%. If you look at Wales, the percentage of their MPs who are Tories, 2010, 20%. If you look at England in 2010, percentage of English of Tory MPs, 56%. 56%, 20%, 1.6%. Now that's not the same. And that's not been the same, that kind of different voting pattern isn't just a little episode in the last few years. It didn't just kick in since Margaret Thatcher, although it's pretty pronounced then. We have been voting, the Scots have been voting 40% or more Labour since the inception of the party in 1921, with the exception of one national government and 3 Tory governments in the 1950s when they built houses. So apart from that, the Scots have been doing what? What are we trying to do? Surprise ourselves, surprise the neighbours, or might we be trying to say that we want a social democracy? Might that be what the long century-long pattern describes? Is a people who kind of are on a different wavelength, who are wanting something different than what England has become. And the tail can't wag the dog. We all know that. So in a way, there's these different dynamics, if you like, about Scotland. And yet, coming back to the weird, well, there's 3 big weirds. One is we have the largest councils in Europe. And many people don't pay attention to this, but I think this kind of matters, perhaps it matters particularly here actually. The average size of a council in Scotland is 175,000 people. Now, I hear no sharp takes of breath, fair enough, because how does anybody know if that's big or small? Unless you start to look where you want to go, probably think that's fine. I mean, the European average size of local council is 14,000. If you look at Norway, which is the same population as Scotland, we have 32 councils, they have 431. If you look at Germany, who seem to be kind of ruled the roost in most things and won the World Cup, which is important to some people, the average size of council that does the same job as our councils here is 7,000 people. And if you look at the actual physical size of those councils, the average size in Germany is 15 square kilometres. Now, that's probably Grangemouth size, isn't it? Somebody that can do the maths? That's about that kind of size. And the average size of a council in Scotland, 990 square kilometres. Average. Now, that's barking. That defies the use of the word local altogether, because that's not local, that's regional. That's strategic. And see the bit at the bottom, the bit where we are, the most valuable asset in any country, particularly the most valuable asset here, because we don't have fair systems that they change easy, so we have to make rules to do anything, and yet we do. Us? No. Yeah. We've kind of amalgamated everything. We didn't matter. Strikes me it's the same way as we used to flare gas off oil rigs, because they were only there for the oil. What's the gas for? Flare it off, man. Who cares? Well, actually, we're flaring ourselves off here, because in every other country that we might be looking towards, you know, that idea of looking where you want to go, the chief characteristic of them is their localism. If you look at somewhere like Germany, only 18% of Germans bank with Deutsche Bank, which is the equivalent of our RBS, the big bank. The rest bank with regional local banks, like we used to have. Good grief, like the Dunfermline Building Society or the Eritrean one or whatever. That's pretty standard. And actually, we're the only people who tend to go the other way. So that's one thing that's pretty odd about us, is that lack of genuine local democracy. Now, obviously, you're here. You know, it's not that there's a complete absence of activity at local level, but it's community-based. Now, thank God for that. And as somebody, as you said, who was, you know, an Isle of Wight trustee for 8 years, absolutely, community is essential. But you know why it's essential? Because it fills a vacuum. If we were in any other country, you would not need to do the semi-heroic things that people need to do in Scotland to simply get a place in Stenhouse Muir to meet, or to own some land, you know, or to own buildings. You wouldn't have to go out of your way to do that as a voluntary effort, because you would have a small council, and actually half of them are councillors. In fact, maybe you are. Are you interested in a councillor? I'm trying to be clear here. I'm not trying to slag off councillors. I'm trying not people. I'm looking at structures here, because the structures are holding us back. We haven't got the normal capacity to be able to get straight out there and do something. And actually, I think that's one of the reasons so many people have joined parties like the SNP, because literally, political parties are the only game in town. You can't do anything else. You know, you can, if you want to, you know, wait till 2017 and stand as a councillor, you know, fair play to you. There was an event over in Oban recently run by two lassies who had been involved in the campaign to buy Castle Toward away over beside Dunoon. I don't know if anybody heard of that one? Yeah. It's a big fancy Victorian mansion. In fact, it turned out it had been built as a summer house for a Glasgow Lord Provost. And it's sort of gone, you know, its glory days had gone a wee bit. You know, there's ones like that all over the place, but this was a real big one. And the community there wanted to buy it because actually, you know, after the Americans had gone from the Holy Loch, that whole area has just dipped. So it was quite a brave thing for them to decide to try and do something. They weren't going to take the actual castle because it's very often a millstone around everyone's neck. It was same on eggs, same everywhere. The big houses need the castle. But they wanted the land. They wanted to have allotments. You wouldn't believe Dunoon hasn't got any allotments because the council can't find any spare land. Why not? Because it's all owned by the Bute estate, Mount Stewart estate. This is getting towards our second weird, by the way. So anyway, these guys put together a business plan. I know because I launched the thing. It took them 18 months to put it all together. A lot of voluntary time, as you could imagine. They ticked all the boxes. They made an application to the Community Land Fund. They got 750,000 quid. They got a 70% support from their local community. You think, that's great, these guys are going to do it. And then when they went with their cheque to their own council, the council said, actually, we want 1.5 million. We've doubled the price. And there was nothing anybody could do about it. People tried to argue. There was a big campaign. That's probably you might have seen in the press. But the council was able to just snub its own people completely. In the end, they suggested that what they might do is they could they could make a loan to the community group of £1 million, which they knew they would never be able to repay. And when they defaulted in 3 years' time, something like that, they could just hand back Castle Toward. That's actually there in an email as a proposed solution, to just avoid the hassle of the moment. Now that is going on everywhere. That kind of totally disparate levels of power between genuine organic communities who know who they are and want to get on with it, and councils that are a 3-hour round trip from that location. In the end, the last meetings that they held about this were not held in Dunoon. That's what the people wanted. No, they were held in Lochgilphead, the HQ, knowing that the people would be able to come on a weekday, so that would absolutely screw them. But still, people made the journey to go there, and they didn't bother to put it on the agenda. They decided it was ultra vires. The decision was just already taken. Now, I don't know if these guys want to get re-elected. You think they don't, but you know what the terrible irony is? They won't get re-elected, because you know what? Nobody wants a job. Even these women, two young women that organised an event in Oban called Our People's Council, which was for people all over Scotland who got scunnered with similar sorts of situations with their own thing. Those two women don't want to be councillors. They've got lives. Why would they want to join the sort of sad group who go off, become absentees from their own lives? Because if you're going to do the job properly, every blinking decision is there. I spoke, one fabulous woman spoke at this event, Vivian Strange, I must say, not in the least strange by nature, but a gallus woman. She is in Helensburgh, it's another 3-hour round trip to Lochgilphead. She is allowed to join a meeting by video conference, but not to vote. Oh, I stumped her. Why not? Because they cannot prove that she is herself. Now, this sort of stuff makes it seem like, well, whatever, no! Because the first level of contact, or the way people experience democracy, or fairness, or all these things are here. 90% of the services you'll ever use in your lives will be 5 miles from your doorstep, within that range. Your whole idea of what's fair in life will very probably be based on housing allocation places. It's as much to do with that as the grand lofty business of parliaments, Holyrood, Westminster. I will think about this arena here. This one cooks. This one makes you feel things are possible, or just slams a tin lid on your feet. This one matters. And yet the most vibrant people are not thinking of getting involved in councils because it looks like it's for dummies. Now, if that's not perceived as a problem, we've got a problem. Because if you go to other nations, and I'll quite grant you, if you go on holiday somewhere, you don't go to people and say, hey, I'll low down on your kind of local government distribution maps and your average populations and stuff. I get that. But actually, if you go anywhere else, especially in Northern Europe, countries that have got only a fraction of the resources that Scotland have got one thing we haven't, which is trust that people make good decisions where they are. So, for example, Sweden, if folk earn less than £35,000 a year, which I'm guessing is everybody in here probably, you wouldn't pay a penny of tax to central government. You pay all your tax to your local council. Now, that seems a bit like, what? I probably gave a slight gesture like that when a Swedish guy told me. And he said, so how do you do it then? And I thought, I wish I hadn't really started this. Well, actually, we sent all our taxes off to Westminster, who through gritted teeth sent some back to Scotland, and then Edinburgh through more gritted teeth sent some back to councils, which are actually so large, none of us can anybody that's on them. He says, right, and you think we're weird. But then he said something really interesting, because he said, do you not trust yourselves? Why do you have to send stuff off? No, we know historically how it worked. We know that power talk, money talks, power talks, and the centre is there. Everybody else has moved on. Or in fact, to put it the other way, other countries never ceded control to the centre to the same degree that Britain did. So we are now left utterly archaic and alone in Europe practically. I mean, it's extraordinary that Germany, to come back to Germany, one of the success stories for it is precisely how decentralised it is. It has an incredible structure of councillors and councils. And part of that structure was created by British civil servants after the Second World War. Because they recognised that everything that tended to centralise power had made it possible for Hitler to succeed. So they made sure that they would not allow that one to run again by having completely separate functions. So for example, Angela Merkel is the most powerful woman in the world, apart from Nicola Sturgeon, obviously. But even Angela Merkel cannot enforce a council tax freeze in Germany. She can't do it. Because that's a completely separate layer of government that she can't mess with. Now that's a different conception completely here. And remember how small those councils are, but there's a right layer of them in there. That's normal. And you know, that's our guys that did that. They did that, they saw how that would tend to encourage much more diversity, much more, democratic stakes, much wider ownership of power. They saw how that would work, did it, came back home, put up the drawbridge, put the Frankfurt sandwiches out, throw out the pins. No change here, man. That works for the folk that have got real, disasters happening around Northern Ireland. If you try shooting gunnies, you also can see how extraordinarily diverse kind of form of democracy you get. The power sharing assembly there had got members from the Women's Party who never won a seat because they were kind of there. And it looked urgent enough that power had to be shared. It had to be shared whether folk liked it or not, beyond those big dividing lines that would crucify Northern Ireland if they remained. Brits could do that as well. Came back home, drawbridge out, you get it. So, the establishment class can see perfectly well how to make a society a modern one if they want, if they need to. They've just never wanted to or needed to do it here. And actually, one of the problems for us is we are all British. Now, I know you'll be rankling away saying, not me, Jimmy. But the trouble is, we have been steeped in this system for all our lives. We cannot think but be British. Alex Salmond is British. The ideas the SNP comes up with are tartly British a lot of the time, because it's very hard not to think the way you've been encouraged to think, unless you start to look where you want to go. And that's why I make little apology for continually making references to the Nordics particularly, because they are small independent countries of 5 million people who are zinging, and most of them ought to be deed. I mean, Iceland, for example, the terrorists, as Gordon Brown named them, in 2008, Iceland was discovered 3 times before anybody stayed. There was a ban. Seriously, there wasn't even any indigenous people to kind of shove out. There was nobody there. If it was a third of all the lava flows on Earth have flowed in Iceland. The only reason it's not called Lava Land was because one of the guys who went and came back again was so kind of, came back to Norway, had to explain why he didn't stay. Because the big Norwegian thing was, you went and you stayed, you explored, and you kind of kept pushing it out. So he had to make out the place was an absolute nightmare, a real nightmare, otherwise there was no explaining why he was back. And he coined Iceland. There's not as much ice on Iceland as there is lava. But nonetheless, it's trying to kill them. I mean, if we thought it was bad to be on the end of Voten, Jöfn, or whatever it was, there's 5 of them sitting, and Hekla, which is the mother of the lot, is well past due a big eruption. One of the last eruptions there probably caused the French Revolution, because it filled the northern skies with so much cloud and smoke that the crops failed for 3 years before the French Revolution and probably stoked up the kind of fervour that happened in France, perhaps. And here they are, these plucky little bampots, right? The Icelanders clinging to this rock with its utter extremes of weather and everything else. Some of them live, they have a huge area of hot springs because the two tectonic plates of America and Europe are pulling apart in the middle of Iceland. It's actually growing by a centimetre a year. And that means there's a whole field of hot springs. That's why Iceland has managed to turn that to its advantage. And it powers everything by geothermal energy. Smart. There's one particular village called Verdigirdi, which has every house in it has a conservatory, and they have cucumbers and lettuce in the winter. You know, it's great because the hot springs just make everything work, except they move. So 1 minute it's beneath your conservatory, the next minute it's beneath your bed. And seriously, the village is uninsurable. The only way you manage to live there is that the government has come up with an insurance policy for how to get it, and people still live there. Now, I admire that in my kind of balmy kind of Scottish way. It's something your heart goes out to them, you just think, go in yourselves. But you know, that's what these kind of Nordic countries, that country, the Icelanders, have got the highest literacy rate in the world. They have the highest rate of book readership in the world. They have the highest rate of internet use. And because of that, they've been able to do a couple of smart things. They've been able to have crowdsourced constitutions, because so many people already use the internet, there's no exclusion to be able to use that. They have a health service that's completely focused on their health problems, because their DNA is so tight because there's been so little incoming and outgoing. They can actually do a DNA profile of Iceland and realise that they'll probably never have, let's say, heart problems, but they're very prone to muscular dystrophy, let's say. They've been doing all sorts of smart things. They're the only member of NATO that has no defence force whatsoever. Not anything. Now, I admire that. There's only ever been 1 million Icelanders in history. There only are 200,000 of them there now. These guys fight so hard, high above their weight, it's uncanny. But they don't have a lot of the baggage that Scotland has had. And that brings me to the second weird, which is land. You probably know the way that land is owned in Scotland is beyond weird. We have the fewest number of people owning their own land in the developed world. So at the moment, it's 423 individuals own half the private land in Scotland. Now that's the second weird. The third weird is that none of you responded. Now, I quite get, you'll be sitting there thinking, tell me something I don't know. Can I know this maybe? But you know something? It is weird to have that level of theft, which is what it is really, and unequal distribution of a key asset. Because land isn't just for growing leaves. Land is beneath me now. Land is beneath your house. Land is beneath banks. Land is a form of bank. You know, land is all these things, and we are sitting, allowing this situation to continue, where we have a tiny number of toffs owning Scotland. And at that, without trying to bring too much derogatory language into it, an awful lot of foreign people who simply wouldn't be allowed to own what they own in their own countries. There's a guy, Anders Poulsen, who is a billionaire from Denmark, who is creating a wilderness by his own way in the Cairngorms, because he can. So he's buying up estates beside one another to create one huge estate, and then no people will be allowed in, and it's just a wilderness for him. And he is almost the second largest landowner in Scotland. And that's saying something, because the largest, the Duke of Buccleuch, owns 1/10 of Scotland. Now these are whopping, ridiculous, offensive, damaging statistics to not react to. You know, if you go to the doctors and they're trying to figure out if your limbs are working, you know, they do that thing with bang your knee, and if your knee's working properly, they can't help but respond. This is a provocation, this is a hurt, and we don't respond, we absorb. Now, I think that's taken a lot of energy up over the piece to keep absorbing the unfairnesses that just go with being Scottish. And actually, we have to change this, because the much vaunted declarations we've made during the election campaign to be the kind of, the kind of commandos of social justice in the UK, if anybody from south of the border ever bothered to actually look in Scotland at the evidence, they would discover it's guy flimsy. And I think this is really where we have to start doing something. And there is movement, obviously. There's a land reform bill, which will do something. Not enough. I know that the narrative is that everyone wants to think, yeah, finally we're doing something about land reform. You can ask questions if you're interested, but it's very unlikely to do what's needed. And what's needed is that currently land in the most remote part of Scotland costs £60,000 for an acre, minimum. Right? Now it needs to come down to 10 or 20,000. It just does, because otherwise a new generation of young folk who might want to live on the land will leave. Because it's easier to get land in Greece. Now, is that what we want? Why can't we tackle this? Because the SNP favour land reform, Labour favour land reform, the Lib Dems favour land reform, so do the Greens. There's only the Tories that are hanging out. And actually, if you haven't noticed, we don't really care about them. There are 423 private landowners. We're not really worried about them. Or are we? Who is running this country? So that's a really important one. And the Community Empowerment Bill, which also should make it easier for communities to sort of tackle councils if they're in a castle territory situation, or you, if you wanted to do more with here or with Stenhousemuir, is another damn squib, I'm afraid. Because in the great scheme of things, if you look at successful countries that have right-sized democracies, like the Nordics, you can get land easily. It's not a biggie, and there are no community buyouts. If you think of it, the need to keep having the ability for communities to opt out of systems tells you everything you need to know about the quality of the system. It's both. You don't need to opt out of good systems. So the question is, are we currently going so much in terms of community? And bear in mind, I'm a great supporter of this, but actually, what we could really be doing with are good systems. And then we wouldn't need to be spending so much time with folk opting out of them. So there's a couple of things, and I just wanted to end with one other big point, which was, I was saying earlier, this thing about people being a big resource, because if you live in any of these other countries, you just need to turn out and vote to change your societies. In Scotland, you need to be a hero. And the thing that I've spent most of the time actually in the book writing about are the heroes in Scotland who go unmentioned. And this is so important, because it matters to know it's your own folk who have managed to achieve every change worth talking about in this country. Always been that it's the folk who finally decide enough's enough and decide to do something, and the politicians sweep in after. And I saw this happen on Egg. There was no support from any party formally, not any. There was some individuals who came to visit, but no party would just go that extra mile, because these guys could just be a bunch of losers. And what happened was that the Egg folk had to spend roughly 10 years of their lives, all 65 of them, to raise £1.56 million to do what? The first thing they did was issue leases to 37 tenants. Now, it took the owner to do something as small as that. Isn't that ridiculous in a democracy that you need to do all of that to have a lease? But they've gone on to do some incredible other things. The most incredible is they do shared equity for land. So, for example, if you're a young person and you want some land, if you go to Egg, you can get the land for free, effectively. You need to pay just for building it, and you can get your pals to help if you think they're useful. I see some pretty rocky looking houses there, but the point is people learn. And you can get a pretty good 2-bedroom house for about 30,000 or 40,000 quid. And that's just not doable anywhere else. If you then go on to sell that house at some time in the future, you need to put half the proceeds back to the land bank trust, and then do the same again with the next child. Now, what's not to like? Is that not actually stoating? And that would create such a leap forward. So I know guys there, one guy, Dean, who is a sea kayaker, he sea kayaked over on the 12th of June 1997, which was the handover day when the people bought egg. He canoed over right from Malay to Egg, which is kind of respect, and he never went home. He basically, it was that kind of party. He met a lassie, fell in love, stayed there, and he's got a bairn of his own there. Now, what kind of house do you imagine a sea kayaker would live in? A 2-bedroom bungalow? Nah, that's what he lives in, because he took advantage of that shared equity scheme. Now, those guys have really used their heads. They've also set up an electricity system. They got money from Europe for that. They got no money whatsoever for the buyout. And it's a stoater, because in the past they all worked off diesel generators. That's all they had. And in fact, it was Keith Schellenberg's threat to stop the farm tractor being used to transport drums of diesel across the island to the old folk, who would therefore be living in cold all winter, that proved to be the last straw that took a lot of folk who were working for Schellenberg onto the buyout cause. But, you know, they've done some great things, and that's all been possible because they're freed from that constant reason over your shoulder, the constant thing that somebody else, that entitlement thing. They are entitled. It is their land. And by God, they have blossomed to fit that really quickly. I mean, they have had, you know the story, they've had centuries of repression. There's no better word for it. But they lost the yoke in a decade. Now, that's encouraging. And it's not just the country folk. I can think of 2 things I just want to finish on. One is West Whitloburn, which is in Rutherglen. Anybody know West Whitloburn? Well, I think the folk there are possibly the bravest folk I know. In 1989, they got the news they live in tower blocks. They're rubbish. They were built in the 60s, 70s, like many. The verandas were coming off. Wind was whipping in through the glass. It wasn't fitted properly. Yada, yada, yada. They were rubbish. In 1989, the Glasgow Council got money to fix them, but it decided to put all the money into East Whitloburn because it was low rise. It's easier to retrofit than a flat. So the guys in the flats realised they were actually stuffed. They were going to never get that. This opportunity wouldn't come around again. And they decided to do something. A couple of them decided to go for something quite ambitious, which was a buyout of their flats. And they took about 6 months to get people to dander up. But they finally got a 60-70% vote. At that time, there was a Tory government. The only good aspect of which for them was that, if you remember, it had a downer on council housing. They wanted to take housing away from councils. Well, actually, so did West Whitloburn. So they came in, got 2.2 million quid off of the Tories, holding their noses big time. And on the 29th of November 1989, they woke up as the proud owner of about 600 of the crappiest flats in Europe. Now, can you imagine what that must have felt like? Because these were the least educated, most unemployed, if you see what I mean, group of Glaswegians, in fact, probably a group of Europeans, given the low status of achievement and so on in Glasgow. And they, the people that the council had dismissed as being incapable of anything, and the housing that the council had run screaming away from, these guys said, we'll fix it. And they did. I mean, most of what they actually fixed, like the egg folk, they fixed quite a lot of other things. This might not be the way you want to live, but they put in a stack of CCTV cameras and they got rid of drug dealing within a couple of months. That was a big first. They then moved to have panic buttons in old folks' homes, flats. So if somebody was just feeling a bit no real in the middle of the night, they could hit the buttons and then one of the Jannies, they have 24-hour Jannies, would come up and speak to them. They would take the messages, the cold weather, all the little trigger points that are so often the points at which an older person is just hospitalised because they have no home. But this way, the group the West Wicklow Housing Cooperative is a home for all of them, and people look out for one another. And this group decided to be a housing cooperative, not a housing association. Now, this is really big stuff, because a cooperative doesn't have any professionals on it. So it can only have tenants from that very cooperative. Now that's belief. You know, and actually these guys probably did very well because they didn't have clipboard builders in their midst at all. Everybody gave up on them. They just knew they were going to fail, and they didn't. And I asked two of the guys that had set it up, Phil Welsh and Muriel Alcorn, you know, how did you have the confidence to do that? Did you have management experience of some sort? Because they all laughed at that, management experience. And then somebody said, aye, but Phil, you were a shop steward of the Boilermakers Union for 37 years. Is that no management experience? And Phil managed not one, but 3 junior football teams. Now, I used to think junior football teams have got 14-year-olds there, but they're not. They're like what you blown in the room to, and you're animals, right? And he ran 3 of them, and he had no management experience. And Muriel Alcorn was a nurse. Well, there's no management being a nurse, is there? And the other 2 women who were very pivotal to it were shop assistants. They were sole shop assistants alone in one of the most difficult areas of Glasgow, mediating that community day in, day out, no police, no backup, no help, and they had no management experience. Right. What they didn't have was just letters after their names. They didn't have an evaluation for their achievements. They just actually operated very well and used their heads. And whoever now is doing extremely well. I wrote a bit. We'd gone into the Scotsman. Somebody from the Spectator in London saw the article, nicked part of it. David Cameron saw the article in the Spectator and called up West Wicklow, or one of his flunkies did, and suggested that they apply for one of his big society awards. And, as a lifelong communist, Phil Welsh had a big problem with that and refused to go, but they're smart enough to realise that they need publicity. You know, they have higher than average management costs because they do more than average. And everyone, including the Scottish Government, is tending to one merger, is tending to one larger units. These wee housing cooperatives, these wee Thrawn guys, they're always looking a bit touch and go. So they felt, yeah, they needed to go. So they left Phil behind, and they went and took, you know, the chocolate kind of poison chalice and took it back. And I met Alex Salmond at Swally about 2 months after that. And I said to him, have you heard of West Wicklow? And he hadn't. Now, I'm not digging him up, he can't know about everything. But the thing is, the Scottish Government and others are going around looking the world over for solutions to the Scottish problem, the underachievement of Scots, the difficulty of these estates where people are 3 generations unemployed. And actually, really very often, the solution is right under our noses. In fact, that housing cooperative history in Glasgow is a proud history. Women again were the ones who started the rent strikes in 1915, when other Scots were taken along with them at the start of the First World War. And they then created a lot of the rent controls. Same story again. People took action. Then, you know, it was women in Glasgow again who stopped the demolition of the tenements in the 1970s and started arguing for local housing associations, Woodlands, the Gorbals, Govan. That was all people power. As a result of which, Glasgow has got more community-led housing than anywhere else in the UK. Do you know that? Well, these are stories we need to know, because once you begin to realise that, okay, we have had a tough gig, there is no 2 ways about it. We have a tough gig. But the really brilliant news to me about the whole thing is that when faced by these incredibly daunting odds, the Scots' reaction eventually is to try to find a way out, to set up something that works, and you know, to do blooming well with those exceptions. I want a society not full of those exceptions necessarily, but for the structure to change so that that becomes our normal. that power is within reach because we do trust ourselves. And I do wonder at the referendum, it may never have been said in as many words. Sometimes it was. But, how does it work that we are considered capable of running our own country, but not our own community? I think we need to start, since we have a little time on our hands, shall we say, we might start now to look at that, because the heavy lifting is probably needed closest to home, and we could be doing that soon. Because the only difference that I see between Scotland and the Nordics is that they have always had governments for the last 2 centuries that empowered and trusted them, and we really have yet to know that. Thank you very much.
Take some questions now. We've got your hands up. Anyone got a question for Lesley? Comment on me?
It'll be fair now. Come on. You're curious about that.
Have you got any ideas how you go to this?
Like literally in here in this room.
No, in this room, but how you've been explaining the systems and all that, right, in different countries.
Yeah.
How did we manage to let all that go and slip it through our fingers and get to a state like what we're in just now?
That is a really excellent question. And it's difficult to see in some respects. The difficulty is Scotland was feudal, Norway wasn't. So what that meant was in the 1100s around, the feudal system came with the French, basically to Scotland, and that created a system where somebody owned land that they would then have allow it out to some other folk who were able to also raise money on it with somebody else. Technically, actually, the Queen owns an awful lot of land as the complete feudal superior. But so that system, that pyramid-like way of owning things, where actually almost nobody outright owned anything, they always had somebody that was a superior to them. That was a peculiar system to Scotland, and obviously France had it too. The Napoleonic Wars knocked out that from the entire system, not just in France, but in all the countries that the French took over. So, for example, in Scotland, we alone have a system where land can be passed on to just the eldest son still. It's like primogeniture, the firstborn can claim that land, and the siblings can't contest it. Now, actually, we changed the law only 150 years after everybody else, so that actually the father can choose to make it an equal distribution. But generally they don't, because they're trying to keep the land holdings intact. Whereas the Napoleonic Code in 1801 equalised all inheritance for children, and so everywhere that Napoleon occupied just trundled on cheerfully from there on in, with children able to inherit and spouses able to inherit equally land. Property is different. Yeah. You can inherit equally property, but not land. And that's part of the reason that our system remained intact, because it's been made easy. The next thing is that these big estates have very often paid no tax. Since John Major abolished business rates on sporting estates, they've paid no tax whatsoever. And then finally, they've tended to create trusts so that their organisation is squirreled away and very often based in offshore tax havens. I went to a glen called Cannock, which is inland from Drumnadrochit and Loch Ness, a beautiful place. You would know about it if it were owned otherwise, because it's got so much going for it. You'd have been there. But you haven't, because it's got a population of 75, and it's run. They did a recent audit to see who owns Cannock, and it would make you weep. Looking down the list in terms of the size of the states, one's owned in the Seychelles, one's owned in the Cayman Islands, one's owned in the Jersey Islands, one's owned in Jersey, boom, 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 boom. And way at the bottom is a couple of Scots. So that's part of where that came from. On the loss of local control, and that happened relatively recently, but I think the problem for localism in Scotland is that it wasn't great. these were not the warm, fuzzy days where you can look back and say, aye, those were the days. They were very often local fiefdoms. So the great and the good used to run councils. If you look at the last century, in Roxburgh, for example, Roxburgh Council on the Borders, for 20 years it was run by the Duke of Roxburgh, he was the convener, and for another 20 years it was his big pal, the Duke of Clune. Now that meant at that point these guys would be your landowner, your landlord, probably your employer, your feudal superior, and they ran the council. You're having your laugh. So you can see why people there wouldn't go, oh, local man, that's just where it's all happening, because it wasn't. For a lot of people, the only democracy they experienced was the opposite. When things became larger, you got some blooming fresh air in the room. It wasn't just the blooming Duke of the Clue and you. So I think that's where a lot of our problems have sprung from, land. And that ownership and the connection between ownership and voting is extraordinary, and we've forgotten about it. One last thing, and also I'll shut up. This is a 30-second wee history thing to make it sleep. In 1814, the Danes went into war behind Napoleon. Bad timing, wrong choice. So Napoleon got gubbed, the Danes got gubbed, and they got their properties taken off them, one of which was Norway. They ran Norway at that point. And the Norwegians thought, yeah, beauty, independence. So the Prince of Norway called 112 men, because it was them kind of days, to a place called Eidsvoll, and they wrote a constitution in 5 weeks. And it was pretty frisky because it was just in the aftermath of the French Revolution. But it had one phrase in it that appears in many constitutions. And it was that it enfranchised all landowners, which were effectively male landowners at that time. And overnight, 45% of Norwegians got the vote. Now that's dramatic. Because you can't run a society on a weak lake in Oslo if you've got 45% of folk voting. You can't divvy it up and carve it up because the unwashed, there's just too many of them voting. Happens to Betsy, they might stand for election, and they did. And so a certain course was set in Norway from that moment. Even though they didn't become independent, they were then put into a union with Sweden, a union of crowns, which is the depot max that we might get to one day, where they had tax raising, and the only things kept in Sweden were defence, foreign affairs, and so on. Yeah. And they stayed in that state from 1814 till 1905, when finally they had a big row about consular representation, surely the Al Capone of reasons to become independent. And on that one, they ended up going their own separate way. Now, compare and contrast Britain. In 1832, our Reform Bill had the same line in it. It enfranchised all male landowners. And overnight, 5% of people got the vote. Now, actually, you can write the rest of it now, because that's 200 years where a democracy with very widespread participation has been cooking, and maybe no surprise then that people managed to keep ownership of land, keep local control, keep things that way. And Britain, where our idea of democracy has always been a thin thing, and has always meant, basically, just interest groups in Westminster carving up power. Because if you've only got 5% of folk voting, you don't need to get your butt out there. You don't need to go and talk to the unwashed. You just don't need to do it. You just need to sit there, figure out how the whole thing works, and British history has been very like that. So I think we're always trying to swim up the river against the stream when you try without realising what odds we've been working against.
Do you think that independence, we could actually restructure the whole, like the infrastructure and everything like that, we could start again with independence? Because I can't see any part of no, even the SNP.
No, precisely true.
Like split up the council.
Well, do all the
Yeah,
things
like what you've been explaining to us tonight.
No,
Trying to get
this is all pretty scary.
Yeah.
I hope you are scared of your it's insurrectional stuff. But yeah, I mean, you could actually tackle these things now, because the control over the size and whatever of local government is completely within the power of the Scottish Government. I mean, it's going to start having an inquiry soon into alternatives to the council tax. Now, some people want to start looking at a land tax. It's a complicated one to describe, but it's an option. Now, you know, if you can start changing things like the council tax, of course you've got the power to change the size of councils if you want. But let's face it, we're in a situation, we're in a rocky sea. You know, is this the time? I can understand why, you know, a lot of parties just want to not discuss that because it feels like it's too difficult to manage. And yet, if there isn't an ability to tackle the really thorny, difficult problems in Scotland, I think people will soon go off the boil.
See, that's my fear, is that people are going to like calm down and definitely get bored and get fed up and just go back to what we were before.
There's a real frustration with the pace of change, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not happening quick enough.
Yeah.
Even
It just seems too big. Like that's what I'm thinking when you talk about that. It's like, okay, well, where would we go? Where would be the first point to start looking at? You know, even if we look at project, if we wanted to make kind of similar kind of off groups of that and make them official, where would we go to kind of start that? And then other people start thinking, well, it's just too big. You know, it just seems like such a big task.
Yeah.
You get overwhelmed by it, and because there isn't the officials in place to go and talk to about it, so you're like, can we do this? What are we doing? What's going on? You know, and I think that's the overwhelming part, and that's what makes people step back and go, if I can do this.
Yeah.
And that's what we don't want, is for people to lose that inspiration.
Yeah.
Could I say something about the general frustration a lot of these younger people are feeling? I think that's down to a huge extent people of my generation born shortly after the war, but taught to be British in Scottish history. The fathers were just come back to the Second War, the grandfathers were still alive. The grandfathers had fought in the First War. Union Jack, I waved my Union Jack, I was a unionist. I voted for Mrs. Thatcher. The Queen, that was God bless her, we all love her. I think what Lesley says too, we need to start getting the land back for these people. Up to fairly recently was still loosely a royalist because at the end of the day he was Queen, but stronger than both. Until the Crown Estate thing came up where London said, oh, the Queen's not going to be paid for Scotland if we're going to keep all our money. Well, I'm new a Republican. I think we need to start at the top if we're going to start anywhere. We need to get rid of the Queen. The other guys were talking about the cheeky
Yeah, but that's keeping life.
some of the youngsters on Facebook and Twitter, man, it might have to be like them. We have to start at the top. The cheeky with Blue and that people, they are called hangers on. That is the Queen and the system that they work with and we have that protects these people. It will continue to protect them. However, for the younger people here, I can understand your frustration, but think of the frustration of the older people who have been nationalists all their days, and I know plenty of them. I've not been. I'm a turncoat. I freely admit it, that I've been a turncoat for many, many years. Longer than some of you have been alive, actually. But the point is, that's how we go. That's, you have got us to put up with. I'm a big believer in that the first referendum was a generation too quick. Because if my generation had been going, the generation above me, the ones that were taught to be British, you wouldn't have had this problem. You wouldn't have had this problem. And the danger I think about is pushing for too quick referendum too, as it's too many of us still here.
Do you think so? Do you think that I mean, don't you think that there's more people like yourself who are changing and who want change.
No enough.
Well, maybe not enough, right,
Not
enough.
that generation.
But don't you even see these groups that are sectarian and things like that are starting to dwindle away too? You know, like, I'm not saying it's a big massive change, but what I'm saying is I see differences.
But those have not been as vocal as indications have been this last few while. Because there is a slight vacuum that we're on the streets any longer, so they're back in the streets again. I live in an old folks complex, by the way, and during the referendum, I'm the only one in the whole place that has internet, so I can follow Lesley Riddoch. I follow him on Twitter, but people read the book, they didn't. What happened to them every week was they got a phone call from somewhere in England saying, you can realise you're going to lose your pension. Now, that was all they were hearing. They would have chapped up doors from your side, I assure you, and said, no, you're not. But they would chap my door, so I know that. Then your side phoned them and says, these people are telling you lies. Now, these are still the people who read the Daily Record and the Pocket Herald and all the Unionist rags. So if they're getting phoned, they're sitting in their house, they go out, maybe to the local shop, they go back home. If somebody's phoning them routinely as it was happening, that's where we slipped up. We were out in the streets, these folk never left their houses. And they won because they knew who to target. Me and my generation, fighting us for our pensions. I'm not going to deny I had a wee money in an England bag with my pension. Because I have a government pension. And I'm not going to deny I worried about it. But I was listening to other people. But for me, the 200 round about me, I think it's probably 2 or 3 years ago. So, you can't blame them, that's my point. They were getting targeted very successfully. The people who realise we don't need maps, we don't need white flags. We've still got enough of that generation that we can swing it today.
And that was Labour that did that because they wanted everybody to follow them like sheep, like they've done for 100 years.
Well, that's it.
And that was the problem because Labour.
All following like sheep, and it's all something you meet somebody who starts to educate you and learn that there's something beyond British history.
We did quite a lot of campaign at the Camden Flats, where it's predominantly elderly. I think I found one of the day this year, streets would be like the movement and that the few factor in the older generation was so difficult to find. And also the thought that, you know, we're not going to be doing much longer. We want to see our last few years out comfortable. We're not up for the fight. Like, that was the kind of attitude that would get kind of, when they tell me,
There's a generation to it.
they didn't actually want to keep the truth because they didn't want to,
I think
which is sad.
I think there's a really good point earlier on. We can't sit about waiting on independence and think that's going to solve all our problems. It's
That's
what we're
right.
going to do now.
That's right.
What we're going to do now.
That's right. How do we
It
tackle
strikes me that, I mean, first of all, that was an extraordinary statement that you made there. You know, it was so heartfelt and so honest. And I would hate you to think that there was any generation that was the wrong one. And it might be because one of the most notorious bits in the whole clearances was a set of people in a glen called Croy, which is in from Bonar Bridge, who before, when they were being evicted, they ran to the church. And they wouldn't go into the church for shelter because they felt they must be wicked because this had happened to them. And on the glass, if you ever go there, you can see that somebody has taken a nail and actually scraped into the glass, "We are the wicked generation." Now that has seared into me because we saw that every year we went north. That was probably our third stop, or maybe we came down the road to see it. But there were so many bits of that scattered around the place, of that self-blaming ordinance that has become quite normal here. And actually, you can unravel this fear of the pensions, which I absolutely agree with you. My mum voted no. I couldn't persuade her. In fact, in many ways, I didn't almost try to persuade her because I didn't want to browbeat her. I respect her. She's died now, she died in January. But I wouldn't want her to be in a position where she had to sit and listen to me thumping on, when inside herself there was just the word no. And what was that about? Jeez, you know, it was a lot. But it struck me one of the biggest things it was about was a very deep-seated belief that value isn't here. Value comes in a pipeline from south. Jobs come in a pipeline from south. Pensions come in a pipeline from south. And that's not just a fear that is related to your generation. It's related to every generation. Everybody's worried that what we have here isn't enough. I mean, the opposite I found, for example, when I've just come, I was on holiday in Crete, it was lovely for 2 weeks. Well, those folk there are the opposite. They're standing there saying, we've got cherries, we've got olives, we've got the best olive oil in the world, and we'll have an argument with anyone who wants to say, we've got snails, you know, we've got crystal clear water from the mountains, we've got solar panels. What are we doing wrong? What are we doing wrong? And you know, they're mystified, healthy, mystified people. Whereas somewhere along the line here, for some reason, we think it's because we have been state dependent for some time, and you can look back to our history in that. You know, the last time a lot of our heavy industry worked was the Second World War. The reason that a lot of the private ownership of iron, steel making, ship making, all the rest of it, textiles, the profits were exported from Scotland. They were never reinvested. And so by the time we came out of the Second World War, we had crap kit everywhere. And we couldn't compete. But folk take that on themselves. No matter how many proud efforts and demonstrations that were made for Caterpillar, for Ravenscraig, for all of them, somewhere people just got the feeling, what's up with us? What have we done wrong? Why are things falling to pieces around us? And I think all of that sits behind that notional fear of the pension thing. It's fear of everything. Because we've got so divorced, sorry to keep beating this drum, if you can stand on a bit of land that you own and say, well, I've got everything I need to eat here, what is the actual problem? That creates a slightly different perspective on life to actually knowing you own nothing from here to as far as I can see. You have no rights over anything from here to as far as I can see. And that's Scotland. So I think we have to somehow get the evidence that value is created by us here, in everything. And that's why the community stuff matters, because I've seen people change. I knew the Egg folk when they couldn't summon the will to phone up and complain about not having a refuse collection on the island. They just didn't think anyone would listen. I can remember handing the phone to Maggie Fife. I got the number off Pat from Island Region, and she just put the phone back in the cradle and she said, I can't bear it, because they won't do anything, because they don't, because that's the way it is. And the same Maggie Fife is now cheerfully changing millions of quid from account to account, because those guys did it the hard way, you know. But somewhere we've got to start learning this. It's our land. It's our Scotland. It's our community. It's your Stenhouse Muir. We've got to start thinking, what's that mean? What would you like to have happen here? What do you need to have happen here? Do you need to do things like do a joint collective deal to try and get your energy prices lower? You could do that. Do you want to own any particular buildings that are falling to pieces that people need? I don't know. Have you got enough childcare? I don't know. Are there things that you think tangibly you might want to do? And I can imagine you sitting there thinking, yes, but on the other hand, that'll take my life over. That's the problem.
I don't think it is changing a bit. It's more
Oh yes, it is.
We are moving in the right direction. Even in Mallow, we have a council and a nursery, and they were adamant, and they're still adamant they're going to shut us. But the local people rose up, and their local councillor was against them because she was in power. The political powers doesn't matter, just when she was in power, we have to fight. And the people won, but how they won was because the provost went to an old people's Christmas dinner, and he was shouting, one of them would speak to him, and he was like, what's happening? You're trying to shut our nursery that's been open in our community for 70 odd years. It was built to house our children during the Second World War, you know.
So they knew that.
Oh, aye, they knew, because I mean, I've worked, I'm now working as a third generation. that long, but you know, this community and on it's a Wednesday, the council overturned the decision on Wednesday, we were shutting on Friday.
Wow.
We're already had practical, and still we've had the local permanent manager in already, but we're still there 3 years later, we're still open, and hopefully because of the child care promotion Scottish Government.
But let me take you
That
yeah,
that was people power,
sure.
you know, and it was on the
Same
last,
thing.
it was the last hour.
Yes,
You know,
it's always like that, when people absolutely think the politicians will finally reflect that. But, I mean, there are other things that, are there any development trusts in the neighbourhood here? Because of the way that there is no organisation of democracy at the really community level, there are community councils. Anybody on the council? Because God love you, that is a sort of mindless task. Do you know the average community council budget in Scotland is £400 a year, and it has to be spent on stationery? I mean, this is just so off the page of where everybody else is at. The English have a system of parish and town councils, which have an average budget of £750,000 each, which is funded by a precept on the rates. You know, that's kind of organised. And that system, the English one, was recently compared to a whole lot of European community democracy and found to be the weakest in Europe, right? £750,000, 400. Now, the recent community empowerment bill didn't tackle that. It didn't knock community councils on the heat and put them out of the misery, nor did it stack them up to have some statutory powers to do something. They're just stuck in this kind of neverland in between. So what happens? Nature accords are valued, so development trusts have come into the piece. Community councils are unincorporated bodies, which many people believe means they can't own an asset. Now, actually, some people would argue that COSLA, Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, is also an unincorporated body which owns Haymarket House in Edinburgh. So actually, ballsier community councils could probably just say, we'll own something, come and give us a chip if you think we've got a problem. However, that's not the way we work. It's always safety first. So development trusts have come in, and they can legally own an asset. So for example, the Isle of Egg is a development trust. It owns the whole of Egg. It's not a community council, it's a development trust. There's 250 something development trusts. They own everything from, there's a pub, Tweedsmuir, the Crook Inn in Tweedsmuir. There's a bridge in the middle of Perthshire that was bought by the community. But mostly it can be wind farms, small wind farms. Lots of the islands have got them, or land, buyers, or rentals, or you name it. And development trusts are quite good at getting groups of people who've got a specific asset they want to run, and they just focus on that. And actually, some of the islands that have got wind farms are about to make megabucks because they've spent about 5 years paying off the turbines, and now they're beginning to get back the money. And there's one place, for example, Park, which is out 45 minutes south of Stornoway in the Western Isles. And these guys have got plans about what they want to do with their money. They plan to build an old folks home, because currently old people are having to leave the Western Isles because there's no places in the council accommodation. So they're just going to build their own one. And they're going to pay people twice the minimum wage to work there. Nice. And they're going to build a causeway over the kind of Firth to take 45 minutes off the journey to Stornoway itself, the bright lights, the traffic lights, etc., so that they can become a suburb of Stornoway. They're commutable, which means that more people live there. And they're going to put tidal turbines in the causeway, so they've already got enough energy, you know, I mean, it's amazing. And the final thing, they're going to write off any student loan. But again, what is not to like about that? But that's because they own the land. Now, all of that incipient intelligence is sitting there, waiting for a moment where it can be used. And it's astonishing how you get a group of people who think they haven't got a studio, really, or haven't got a sense of how to run something. But given the moment, it's like we used to say, you know, cometh the hour, cometh the man. It's cometh the hour, cometh the community. once you get some control of something, you can get up and running. Now I'd like to ask you something. If you think there's 250 communities like that, half of whom probably have some pretty hefty wind, money coming in, how long do you think, what are they going to spend that money on? I mean, all the things I've mentioned to you are substituting for government services. These are becoming DIY communities. They're not sitting there saying, we're just going to let everyone go to, El Nankart in the Western Isles. They're saying, we're going to fix this. And how long are those going to people going to keep paying council tax? I mean, again, in Fintry, we're in Glasgow, they've got wind turbines and they've got, they did insulation of homes there, they've done various things, and they put on a bus because the council had, chopped the bus service. So they put a bus back on. How long are they going to want to pay for bus services they will get? How long are communities going to want to just spend money on window boxes when vital services aren't there? So I think what may happen is that more and more people are setting up development trusts because they're getting scunnered and they can see a particular opportunity or a particular crisis, two sides of one thing, and they go for that, and then actually, particularly with energy ones, they can earn some income and then they have an issue about how to spend it, and then it kind of gets quite interesting. And it doesn't need to be just rural communities. We've all got wind.
Education.
You do need the land, but you could
either to set these kind of things up.
Sorry?
You don't have the well. Well, I personally don't have the well to install the wind farm.
Yeah, but you don't need to. This is what I mean. We need to learn the business of owning stuff, because the Scots are very tentative about ownership for very good reasons, because we've owned diddly squat throughout history. And our grandparents owned nothing living on the land. Nearly everybody's great-grandparent in this room probably, or maybe one before, was a tenant somewhere on the land. And if they lived for 6 months in the one place, they were unusual. It is gobsmacking to see some of the conditions that people came from. There's something like, in Aberdeenshire, there was something like in the 1850s, 200,000 men who were married but never lived with their families. They lived in the bothies of single men because there was no cottages available in an empty landscape. And those people, when they came into the cities, they settled for the same rubbish deal as they had to settle for in the country. A friend of mine who's a professor in Norway said, the reason you guys were stuffed, and I was sitting on thinking, really, right, because you know where to go back to. Now, I mean, the Norwegians always owned a bit of land. Even if they went into the city, they didn't not own their bit of land. So if the going got rough, they just bailed out. Now, it didn't mean it was happy valley on the land, it was rubbish. But it still gave them an alternative, and it meant they weren't a captive audience, they weren't cannon fodder. But Scots there was a deliberate pool of unemployment kept on the land to make sure that people just jumped. And so council housing was a boom when it came. The housing conditions in Scottish cities were just appalling, and actually, many of us carry it still in our stature, in our health, in our genes.
Lesley, I would give you comments for Glasgow, I'm born and bred in Glasgow. I'm unfortunately coming here.
What, 20 years?
No, 10 years.
All right.
Trust me, I'm still very cool. I totally agree with you. Glasgow is a fantastic city. I grew up in Mary Hill. And there, your pre-programmed to vote Labour, that was it. Maria Fish was the MP when I first started voting. And if I'm honest, she put a donkey and a monkey up, and it wouldn't matter, because they were just followed blindly and voted Labour. Labour now have obviously the right good shafting, and thank God for that. Personally, I hope they come back. I hope they find their roots and they find their base, because we need another party in Scotland to challenge the SNP. I'm a big SNP fan, but I feel we need something different that's going to really challenge. And unless they break away from Westminster for the English party, they're never going to succeed with that. And then we'll be stuck with this one party system. I think also as a country we continually put ourselves down. We've got so much going for us as a country. I think this constant negative chip on the shoulders about Westminster and everywhere else. We need to grab this opportunity to throw it and go for it. My generation will be the generation that will put the seeds in place to drive this. The next generation coming up with the generation that won't push this and drive this to completion. The other thing was, I don't know how you can sit in some of these television programmes in front of some of these nitwits to and stay calm, because I've watched you on television and I've seen you about ready to explode at some of them, in some of the bizarre comments, especially you're sitting next to, I think you're sitting next to that idiot Forsyth, I think it was, when we were right,
Oh, yes, that was
after the
right.
referendum. I would rather have dragged him under the table and just smashed his face in. But
Like you last week.
I stay calm at that moment, I do not know. And I do miss you on BBC as well.
Well, it's probably those years that actually, you know, because I mean, I was a presenter and I'm not supposed to have any opinions. So the only way I could, you know, pull something one way or the other is just by the questions that you ask, and what you're keeping, you know, what you're keeping behind your ear for the next, and listening, really listening, because invariably, where were we talking about the fireman's thing? Yeah. That was just, I didn't know, this is, we need to know about this. But it was a long time ago when there was a fireman's dispute, and what's your name, Brian Sweet. Yeah, Brian Sweet was the head plumber in Strathclyde. Bizarrely, he came on, and I didn't know this, but just listening to what he was saying and how he was saying it, we finally established that the system that they actually had, because he was claiming that it wasn't dangerous what they were doing, because you know, there was a point being made that the guys couldn't get into the engines quickly enough if there was an actual fire. It was the guys that said they would respond to emergencies, but there was a suggestion that the kind of fire service was making that hard for them to make them look bad. So he basically, I got out of him in the end anyway, that he had got, there was a system that they could easily use a fire engine in an emergency. All you had to do was break into a safe with an axe to get the key to, what was it again?
Use the cutting gear off the fire engine, break into the safe to get the key to the fire engine, it was going to an emergency whilst we were on strike.
I didn't actually know that, you know, before we went in. I was just listening very acutely to him. You could kind of hear bits that just his choice of words was odd. You know, it didn't quite cover everything. He began to look away when he was nervous about something, and you just kept following it, you know. And then finally, this ludicrous situation came out. Well, I have to say at the end of it, I think I did say, I can't believe that I'm listening to this rubbish. You just can't be serious that this in any way amounts to a. Now, I suppose that's my habit. I did that for 20 years. So I'm sitting listening to these guys, and I'm waiting for the moment that they just give me what I need. And then I'm just basically thinking, come to none. You know, so it's fine. I don't need to show them anything, because I'm just sitting waiting for it with my next move. That's the way I suppose I try to do it.
Do well.
Well, whatever. And maybe, I do know this, maybe, it's like the woman vice theory, eh? You know, I mean, like, women seem to be able to calm situations down a wee bit sometimes if you can just hold your ground. So I think that's probably what I thought.
So just one more thing for me, really, this land reform bill that the SNP are pushing it. Why do they not go the full unit then? Why are they pulling back for it?
Well, their contention is basically that we've waited too long to do this. So we've waited until we're in an era of rights. And this is so ironic, because it's the European Convention of Human Rights that the freaking Tories want us to get out of, that gives rights of property to landowners. There was one test case, Salveson versus can't remember who, in which that section of the European Convention was used by a landowner to basically argue against any tenant farmer buying his land. And that put the fear of God into lawyers, and it's lawyers that run the world, don't you know? So whilst the SNP might be reasonably frisky about some things, as soon as you hit the civil servants, you hit a tremendously risk-averse set of people who truly are British. I mean, they have been run and trained, you know, from a British perspective for centuries. So the problem is, they think if you make a kind of carte blanche statement of the kind that was suggested by the Land Reform Review Group, they said, for example, that there should just be a maximum size of landholding, and anything over that was just not on. And that guy would be quite excited. That sounded quite, that would fairly move things around. The lawyers tell them would fall foul of that European Convention thing, because it just sounds like you're out to just get the property of landowners, and they would invoke the European Convention of Human Rights to say that's not fair. So what they've come up with as an alternative is to have lots of individual cases where the minister has to sit and say, it's not that we've got it in for you as a class, but in this particular circumstance, looking at other human rights, sustainability, right to housing, right to community, in this particular circumstance, I think you need to go on your bike route. And what has to trigger those individual circumstances, this to me is the big problem, is the community. Now, having known the people of Egg, who are a feisty bunch, if you've ever gone there, you wouldn't really think these were guys who were too backward at coming forward. They put up with absolute rubbish for decades before they had the confidence to stand up against Shelburne. The place are not wanting to isolate themselves. In rural areas, they don't put their heads over the parapet because the landowners are still their employers. They're still the landlords. They still run everything. And you take them on at your peril, because if you lose, you're stuffed again. And in city or urban areas, what do you feel you want to take on? It's quite hard for urban communities to get a sense of land, because it feels like it's the stuff between you and the bridge. It doesn't feel like land is here. So I really wonder whether that dynamic will work. I think the most stuffed communities will be the least likely to come forward. Now, there are two ways this could happen. One is if the scale of ownership or the neglect of a landowner is such that you think that they need to go. And for example, the guy I was talking to you about earlier, the guy Anders Bilson, the Danish guy, billionaire, he falls into the scale category because he owns half the blooming Cairn Gorge now. But it's not retrospective. So you have to wait for him to go for another estate, and then the community could object. Here's a little snag. Who's the community? It's a wilderness. He's taking on places that have maybe got one village in them. Are they going to have what it takes to quickly get their act together to put a kind of complaint in that this guy should be, stripped? Maybe they will. So that's one kind of thing, the scale. So there's the problem. The Duke of Buccleuch sitting on a 10th in Scotland, toasting. Because it's not retrospective. He's not going to get touched at all by that. Negligence. I was on Isla last year. I was all over the place during the referendum last year. I was on Isla. Quite a frisky bunch there as well, actually. And terrible conditions for a lot of tenant farmers. I was there in July in one person's house, and there was water pouring down the inside of the walls in July. Now, the difficulty is that these guys, some of them are even just on annual leases for 2 years or 5 years. And that doesn't give you time. You don't even know if your kids are going to be in the same school. That's how bad it is. Even though your family might have been there for generations on a series of 5-year leases. It's ridiculous. And the estate doesn't bother doing the house up because what the heck? And you're not sure if you're going to bother doing the house up because you could get chipped out, and it's happened. And in fact, if you improve the property, there's stages at which it makes you even more likely to get chipped out, because after all, they get a better rent because thanks very much, you did it up. Honestly, that's happened. So it would be a pretty good circumstance for people to come forward and say, Isla estates are neglectful landowners. And actually, I think they might be one of the first that might use it successfully, because they've had it up to here. When I was round in Isla last year, they were so raged. They'd gone around with saltires and yes signs on all the barrels leading into all the distilleries on the island. I think you can probably imagine the distillery owners probably weren't in yes camp. They just painted them off. Yes, anyway.
I know the Springbank when they came out and they were a big.
So that's the two sort of ways that you can act. But as you can see, they're very, very specific sort of ways. And there's an awful lot of places that just won't get their act together to intervene. There's other ways, behind the scenes that things can happen. But this is not the sea change that we kind of needed. It needed something that just took the brave step of taking the landowners on. If they wanted to have battles in the courts, fine. I mean, sometimes you could just do with a Cyprus or a Varoufakis. You know, you could do with, yeah, guy with a leather jacket and motorbike would just do this one, because you need them to see that you're willing to take them on. And what they've seen now is that we're not.
Again, why are people in this day and age living in these conditions in Scotland? Why are they being allowed to live in the conditions? Why would the Scottish Government not step in and do something with that to support these people?
But actually, you said something about that before that I thought about, you know, when you talk about do things we deserve it up here, and you listen to the radio stations and the newspapers coming from England. I've got family from England, obviously you can hear that, and you know, they have such a skewed view of what happens in Scotland, and the government's constantly telling them that they get handouts. That Scotland lives off handouts from Westminster. I've got family, they're all from Newcastle, and they're like, why do they get, prescriptions free? Why do they get an education free? Why aren't we? You know, they can't, all they're hearing is what the government's telling them. And then I think Scotland gets that from England, is they, that England feel that way towards them. And then Scotland, people just want, I'm sorry about that, And I think it's just bred into where people feel apologetic for the fact that they get more. Comparatively in some ways, and that's what I feel anyway when I live in Scotland and my family is saying that. I'm like, sorry, just as it is, I mean,
that can be true, but your question still remains, because once again we have complete control over this. I mean, there's some aspects of land. If we want to put a land tax in, taxation still is out to Westminster, so actually we can't do that. But actually, to be fair, Labour and the Lib Dems have done more work on potentially changing tax structures with Andy Whiteman, who should be canonised at some point. He's the guy who wrote a book. He first wrote Who Owns Scotland, which took him, 8 years to write, where he just managed to get a snapshot of who owned what. It's not having to be registered anywhere, so he actually trawled the country just trying to find maps and things that would allow him to know at that moment exactly who owned Scotland. And again, within the time of publication, it was inaccurate. But he then wrote another book more recently, The Poor Have No Lawyers, which explains why we're where we are. The poor have no lawyers. So a lot of the time it's forced mayor, those who've got possession has been 9/10 of the law. So a lot has been taken that legally didn't belong to whoever took it, but the poor have no lawyers. So there you are. And Andy and people like Peter Peacock, who was a Labour government minister and is now leading the community land group, the community buyouts. And people like the cursed Ian Davidson, the Maryhill MP, who was like a hammer against the SNP. Ian Davidson set up a committee in Westminster to look at a land tax, the possibility of bringing a land tax in for Scotland, which all these guys worked together with him to do. So this is why I find this so frustrating, because there are guys in all the parties who have put their lives into trying to fix this thing, and we're still sitting without anything that's going to make any particularly big change. But I think it's, those of you who are old enough to remember Olga Corbett will remember that she got her perfect 10. I think she was the first, or was it Nadia Comaneci? To get the perfect 10 withdrawal exercises, and I was always interested to know that one of the requirements of that was to use every bit of the square. You could be perfect in all your moves, but if you didn't go right to the edges of everything, you didn't get 10. Now, I think the thing is, we're on an 8. We're just not going to the edges of our control. We're not going to the edges of our powers. And the question then is why? And I think it's because the governments are scared that we're not with them. And unfortunately, I think that's because they haven't given enough power to us for us to know what it is to own things, to steer things, to want things. So it is, really, I think an awful lot begins to happen when folk have got the experience of starting to run things. And mostly they get tremendously good job of it. And once Peg, for example, yes, I'm sure, to a person. Because their attitude was, if we can run this place, Scotland's a gobble, And I think that's the way things tend to work. Conversely, if you're very dependent, as brazen as you might want to be, and let's face it, Scots are world champions at basically being able to brazen out stuff when actually they've got nothing going for them at all. So we can put a big bravado thing on, and there's a difference between bravado and bravery. Bravado, you know your stuff, but you try anyway, you know? Now we can all do that. I see Mr. Mary Hill smiling here. You can do that, right? But we're beyond bravado. We're not trying to impress anybody now. What do we actually have as courage and confidence in one another? No false dawns here. What can we really believe we can manage? And the answer to that is not much. But it's because we don't know anyone who has. You know, we generally don't know anyone who owns things much. We don't probably know NSPs or councillors. We probably do more now, actually, as a result of the last few while. But until it becomes Nea Vicky, it feels exceptional to want to own something. It feels English. We've got to get out of that habitus thing.
It's all over the
It's a bit, but it's in the thinking because it's in our past. There are good reasons. I'm not a believer in the confidence theory. You just have to say to somebody, have more confidence. If you've got very good community and family reasons rooting you in a past where, well, one other guy, a guy called Paulo Freire, who's a Brazilian, he wrote a very unsnappily titled book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. This is a world bestseller. And the first time I saw anyone other than me reading it was a wee guy called Alan McCraig, who was one of the acid crofters. And I was sitting inside the house watching him in kind of horizontal sheet rain in acid, rolling a cigarette with one hand and reading The Pedagogy of the Oppressed in the other as he tried to move sheep into a bank. And I thought, what the massive, I mean, that's why I got involved with the acid crofters. Alan came in and he said, this man has got very good things to say. And what his main thing that he wanted to say was that the business of being inferior is a skill. There's a whole set of skills associated with being a second-class citizen. You learn to make do with second best. You learn to keep your head down. You learn to keep your mouth shut. You learn to weed out troublemakers. You learn all those things and you survive. And that's how, those are the skills associated with being second-class citizens. And he's a Brazilian, right? He's not a Scot. All over the world, these processes are at work. And when circumstances change, people hang on to these skills because I like to have skills and I like to use them. So actually, the prison door could be open, but you're still sitting here with all your skills. Keep your head down, shut up the troublemakers, then you ask for too much, then they go for the sky. And what his contention is that you have to consciously unlearn these habits. You can't just think they're going to sort of just, drift away. They don't, they cling on.
But there's so much you.
That's right, that's why, because they're the reason you survived. And they're utterly inappropriate for the next situation you'll be in, but you hang on to them.
Yeah, I was just thinking, as you say, people need to be generally more confident to push things. But for people, for individuals to be more confident, they need to see some confidence from their leaders. Yeah. And I know, you're not sitting here and having a particular political party, but one thing that disturbs me at the moment is that we've got a lot of new MPs at Westminster. And what we're seeing at the moment is Westminster doing its very best to make sure they have as literacy as possible. And I would like to see something quite kind of radical happening about that, because I feel if the population in Scotland in general, I think, well, okay, we've got all these MPs down there, they're nearly all Scottish nationalists. What difference is it making? Then people's interest and confidence is going to fall back.
Yeah. Well, actually, you're absolutely right. I've been thinking about this too, because you can see now, actually, you knew this was going to happen before it started. The maths is there, 56, 400, whatever the heck, you're gonna throw yourself against that, and you're going to get nowhere, over and over and over again. It's like Sisyphus rolling the ball up the top of the hill, comes down again, up the next morning it goes. And I wouldn't wish being one of the 56 on my worst enemy. It's one of the reasons I personally didn't want to do it, because I worked down the Westminster unit. It's a hollow, lonely existence. It's probably the reason Eric Joyce went bonkers. And, you know,
One of the reasons.
yes, being charitable, or it might be being webcam. But now you need to be a bit clever about this, because okay, 56 gets you nowhere in terms of turning up. So, you know, this is why Sinn Féin didn't turn up. Now, not turning up is a biggie. Is there something in between that can make a statement? Because what's going on now is, it depends how much the 56 or the Scots want to push the fact that we have got effectively 2 elections, you know, 2 results. One was Scotland voted overwhelmingly SNP, and the result was, you know, the main result was the Tories got in, and this one then therefore is totally trumped. Well, you've got to be clever then, have you not, as to what you do with that to try to make trouble. And sitting dutifully turning up in the chamber every day to argue your hearts out like wee linties, only for the pubs to open at whatever the heck it is, 10 minutes before the vote, and everybody surges out to vote you down. I don't know how much point there is in doing that anymore.
I think the people have got to show them now. Like, see, we've been holding rallies, right? And we've been getting MPs, MSPs up to speak and all the rest of it. But, you know, they're ignoring that, and they're ignoring their 56. I think the people now have got to stand up and be counted. They're the ones that's got to say it now. Not the MPs, not the MSPs, but the actual people in Scotland. They need to get rid of the Tories, and the only way they're going to do it is to take to the streets, because that's the only way they know how. Because we've sent 56 MPs down, and they're making a mockery of them.
Yes, that's true.
They're laughing at
But
it.
it's raising the frustration. So we can use it.
Well, that's what I'm saying, the people-
As you see, we're getting impatient.
Yeah.
We want to see some move. We didn't want to lose the momentum. So seeing day in, day out, our MPs that we've sent in there being ridiculed, being totally ignored.
Okay, well, how many people, just out of interest, went to the austerity march that Radical Independence organised in Glasgow? We used to go on holiday. Yeah. Because, well done.
The TUG was on SLP's.
Oh, yeah.
Children's office was set on the same day. It was set before the new, but there was
Yeah.
the rally, so there was a bit.
Well, that's possible. I mean, in a way, it's not either or. You know, seems to be clever strategies take in all the different dimensions of the fact that we've got 56 MPs. I mean, are we just chucking it away now? Or we say we've got that because they just have to turn up and get voted down every time. That's their lot. Is that the
Well, I
way
think we
to
need to be behind them and show the Tories that it's us that's doing the talking now, it's not them. Like, we're not going to allow them to talk our MPs.
I appreciate your point, but these guys are not twits.
No,
There's
no,
a fair lot of talent in there. Are they just, I mean, I don't know, is it an idea to just sit and have another parliament? That they don't go to that parliament, they go to another one.
I think we need to use it to show that 55% have voted no. This is what we've got, this is our lot, we need to change the whole system.
We're seeing that.
The only system we've got that can change it is independence.
And I think probably you're saying that, you don't need to, you know, I'm only asking, we've got our reserves. Are we just saying these guys are going to turn up and hit their heads off a brick wall day in, day out for 5 years?
Yeah.
I don't
Lord Denver, who were unelected and majority British, they're not supporting the Scottish votes. I mean, what was just in their parliament there?
Yes, but I mean, I think we've probably got to the stage now where most of us know this is the score. You know, there's not probably an awful lot of point in getting terribly astonished about it. You know, I see endless press releases coming in from the SNP press office. God love them, these guys are working overtime. And there's outrage about every aspect of everything, but actually you overuse that sometimes. You know, we're worn out with outrage now about the whole thing. In fact, it's predictable, that's why we voted yes. I get it. So I just think we have to now be a bit more creative about the ways that we're going to use the assets we have. What a big asset is us, another big asset is those 56.
They didn't turn up for a stretch of time, that would be something.
It would, well, who knows? And that's the thing that I admire about the Greeks is they've sort of fired off into the blue yonder. I mean, they don't know where this is taking them down.
It's seen how the national press dealt with the whole referendum, how they lied in Chile. I mean, can you imagine if 56 SLP members of parliament didn't turn up? How would the press treat that? I mean, it will do nothing out of it, nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, they would hammer us for it.
Yeah, but then in that case, what confidence is there that there's anything, any action anyone can take? You know, if you play by the rules of the winners, you will lose all the time. And I mean, it's a great book. It's the book that actually made me resign from the Scotsman, actually, which was called the Princessa, and it was written as a female version called Machiavelli's Prince. And Machiavelli wrote the rules for princes of using power. And this woman had written one aimed at women because basically you needed to break a lot of the rules. And that was her point, that, you know, the rules basically in most societies are written by the winners and they suit them. So you need to break them. And her advocacy to women was to break rules. Now, women are the most law-abiding people that there are. And so it comes very, very hard to have to start learning to break rules. I was brought up to be a nice girl. I didn't come out like this. And there's still very strong, nice bits of me. But I can override it when I really need to, because I know I need to break rules. Sometimes I try to develop a judgment as to which those situations are. So I don't get angry at most of these bans, but I will reserve, you know, a situation where I would take direct action.
But there's a point when you do need to get angry. There's a demonstration, I think it's $11 or $20. It's going to kill the Grove Park.
First August.
Sheridan's involved in it, but that's just another story.
So that is another story, unfortunately.
Try to reinvent yourself as some hero, but at the end of the day, you guys do, is out there fighting for stuff in a strange kind of way. And his good friend Pat Lee, just drives me insane about him.
I know, me too. I just can't stand that.
He's a strange guy. I think it's the right idea, but it's just a strange that way.
I think.
But again, we need to get behind these demonstrations. We need to get grassroots people involved.
We need to get out there marching and showing them what we
and of course, we need to do that. We need to do that. My daughter's involved with it, and she actually.
Oh, I know.
We've got to show people that we're there and we care. You've got to show people that we're there and we care.
I mean, the thing is, if you keep playing, that's what I was trying to say, if you keep
Chipping
playing
away.
that hard, you just stop everything, because everything will be under control. No, that's true. We actually mostly need to impress each other. You know, we need to impress each other with stuff. And the difficulty with trying something that produces a small outcome is that it does the opposite. You know, it pulls people's confidence down. Now, I can remember, you know, this is before actually everything surged, but do you remember there was a kind of rally for independence at Colton Hill, and there was a lot of debate about whether it was 35,000 turned up to 40,000 or something. Practically 2 weeks later, the folk in Catalonia had a demonstration, and they joined hands between Barcelona and the Pyrenees. There was something like 195 miles, and they stood like that.
The BBC said it was 14 people.
Yeah. No, but that was a pretty major demonstration. I mean, they're stuck with their own dynamics. You know, they've got a situation. I can remember when the guy who ran the Catalan Independence Party, whose name I've forgotten now, came last year to the Scottish Parliament, and when he arrived, he said he envied the Scots because we had this deal, you know, the Edinburgh Agreement. We were going to actually have a referendum. They can have one. And by the time he went home, he says, I don't envy you anymore, because we have a movement, you haven't. And that was at the point where independence was probably 31% or whatever, it was stuck on that plateau. Now, you know, fair play, it moved up, you know, to the giddy heights. But actually, the Catalans have roughly 70%, 60 to 70% right through and now. But then, let's be fair, the Catalans control far more than us. They have 4 Catalan language newspapers. They have, I think, 2 Catalan language TV channels, and they've got online sites. Now shores up a sense of independence in the classic way that countries have become independent, which has nearly always been linguistically based. There's been a cultural linguistic shell that holds one set of people here that makes them feel they are a distinct people. And the Scots, unbelievably actually, have done this quite differently. There's not really a big linguistic difference between us and the English. We're speaking roughly the same language. So the difference has been civic. And that's what I think is our strength, that we actually want a social democracy. I personally think we need to start, acting that way. We need to start slowly taking over bits of control from councils, from landowners, from politicians, from Hollywood, from wherever. We need to start getting things to work here, now, not later, not the next generation, sir. Now, all of you, the mixture maxter that you all are, because this is life. The end.
I was just going to say, I think it's really interesting. You've spent like the last couple of hours talking about community and how we should get more involved as a community and start doing things. And a lot of the questions from people from audiences drifted back to politics and drifted back to party politics and marches and shouting. And I feel like we did quite a lot of screaming at the ocean during the independence referendum, and we didn't really get very far with that. And I feel like what you're trying to say is maybe we need to just look at the community that we're in and try and make something better work for us. I don't know if anybody heard John McNally's maiden speech in Westminster, but his key phrase was, "I'm going to get busy in my own backyard." And I think that's something that he would want us to do, and I think that's something that we would actually all benefit from. Actually looking at what we want in the community and seeing what we can fix and what we can build on and what we can
Well, you look at this place, this is a start, isn't it? Forward, this is a start. And there could be other places called Forward. We could open up other places in the whole community, the whole area.
That's kind of conscious of the time now, but that's what we're aiming to do. I mean, we don't just want to sit and have as good as I've enjoyed the event tonight, and we don't just want to sit, we actually want to do something. We want to, whether it's maybe build a kids' play park, maybe come up with a nursery, maybe an adult kind of place for elderly people to go during the day, they set up, something like that. If that's the kind of thing we would like to do. Obviously, not we wouldn't fund it just from here, but we could kind of drive that.
But you could all those different things. I know you could get different funding for.
Yeah.
If you form as a development trust. I mean, I'll maybe have a wee chat with you afterwards, but I think it would be well worth one or two, either inviting somebody from the Development Trust Association to come speak to you, maybe your next meeting, because they cover all sorts of things that are run by the community, including old folks' homes, children's stuff. There's also, this might sound a bit, another idea is community shares. This is how people are finding money without having to trawl around getting grants all the time, because there are, not necessarily everybody in the room here, but there are folk with a bit of money who could invest in shares in a community scheme. Why not? People have got pensions, those pensions are all invested in shares. People have got savings that end up being invested in shares. I've got money invested in 3 community hydro schemes on Mull and Ardnamurchan and Sunart. And there's more and more community share schemes being set up. It's like a sort of crowdfunding thing, but there's a bigger investment made by people. Well, some folk haven't got that cash to invest. I do, so I'd rather invest in community things that look like they're reasonably likely to work. That's fun. And so it doesn't work in every circumstance, but there's a right lot of people beginning to think, I'm not sitting here waiting for the slow gravy train with the endless form filling and all that stuff to do. Let's just get the show on the road and see if we can get some folk to put in a couple of thousand each. Because actually, you probably got it. And you spend an awful lot of time going around the houses trying to get a quid from everybody for crowdfunding, or waiting for 4 years to fill in the T's and dot the I's and everything to get a grant. Actually, you might just manage to tap a few folk who could get the ball rolling. And there are definitely funds at the moment for communities. It's the flavour and love for the government. So if you could, it's worth investigating that, because you could choose one not try to do everything.
No.
But it's a very good idea, I think, to brainstorm at the start, get all the ideas out at the start, so you can decide which is the one that really works for you, the one that you might have most possibilities with, the most enthusiasm for, most belief for. And then once you've made that brainstorm and get it all out, and make sure everyone talks, don't let it just be the noisy ones. Then pull it right back down and decide which it is and then stick to it. You don't need to constrict yourself at the start, but I make sure once you've really had a good airing of it, you come up with one idea at the end. And there's loads of folk who can help you with that.
I thought you can I just say something in defence of the 56 MPs. More and more in English press are starting to say there's a good thing doing there. People are listening to them. I even say that if you notice Lesley, the Speaker of the House,
Yes.
he even says there's been like a breath of fresh air in this place.
Well, he said that at the start before they
No, but the thing is,
because they turned up.
the thing is, he's been genuine about that, and he's a soddy man. I think they are doing well. I think English, an important thing to actually is English people are looking and listening to them, and they're thinking of a breath of fresh air. They often hear a lot of English relatives. They're all saying, I wish we could go SNP. So these people are doing a great job, folks. Don't write them all.
I mean, they're looking at their guys thinking these guys will barely turn up, and here's these Scots, and they've only got 56. I've got 400, and half of them are.
Yeah. So, yes, well, that's a very good point. And actually, because of this, because there was the election May the 7th, then they kind of farted about for a while. They probably only really sort of all got sworn in by the early June or something like that. And then they're, they still about to go into recess, so they really haven't had much time. Actually, what will happen is their rights as the third largest party will start to kick in quite demonstrably. I know I was on Question Time in Aberdeen kind of a month or 6 weeks ago or something. And I was speaking to the producers there, and they said they will now have the SNP on in English constituencies, as Alex Salmond was, but they'll have them on every other week now because they have to. So and it's interesting because actually this comes back to your demonstrations thing. The thing that cut it for them wasn't the big, earth-moving changes that have happened in Scotland, because that was all irrelevant. It was the fact that things happened in Westminster right under their noses. Is that one? So I have a horrible feeling that the things that change attitudes in London are what happens with Westminster MPs. So absolutely, these guys, they have, I think they have made a tremendous impact. They seem like sober, earnest, capable, dogged, determined people. What more could you want? Well, I do actually want more. I would like to think of, maybe not yet at all, but at some point there might be some strategy to do something different, because they're collecting enough cachet and respect to then be able to use it somehow for saying something perhaps bigger than just keeping turning up. That's all I'm saying. It's not yet.
Something like 50 of them have got a lot of 11. Wednesday's 50, Wednesday 50, they've got up the house at 24. I think we see a huge impact in there.
I just hope the people have got patience and
I know that's what I'm trying to say, isn't it? If you talk about confidence, I've got absolute confidence that the young people here will see independence. They will make it happen. I don't have that confidence about my end of the thing. But it's like, if you want me to talk about confidence, I can confidently say that once the young people here are in charge, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. They've got the enthusiasm that's lacking to the votemen.
Well, the young people are so clued up.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The one they brought up to me, British system point, they're Scottish. Scottish through and through. And that's what gives me the confidence it's not going to happen.
And they know their stuff.
Barry Black, I know they're trying to make a fool of that last year.
With some of the lesbian cards and that. Because they see that rise.
Right, thanks everyone for attending tonight, and there's bricks available up there if you want to get back some coffee. More welcome to stay for a cup of tea and refreshments, and but we'll need to let Lesley cut the road.
Can I get a picture with you before you go? Of course.
Yeah, so back to